So today we're going to go through an ancient text called Drishya Viveka. Now, roughly that translates to the discrimination or the difference between the seer and the seen. And this is one of those ultra efficient Vedantic or Hindu Upanishadic texts. It relates to that philosophy, that post-AD Hindu philosophy. The reason why I say it's efficient, at least for me personally, when I first read this and went through it, and actually Swami led me through it, it made significant impact on what we would normally call enlightenment. All right, so we're going to go through this. It's a very short text, although it takes a little bit to go through this first time around. It's a very short text, but it is efficient at blowing your mind and changing your reality. So let's actually dive right into it, and we're going to go line by line. It starts with the obvious before it leads you to quote unquote enlightened reality. And I put that in quotes because, as we'll soon find out, there's no one to be enlightened. And that sentence makes no sense right now because we haven't gone through this yet. But it will. Trust me. This is as close to instant enlightenment as you can get is going through this philosophical proof. Okay? So let's dive right into it. Verse 1. All objects are perceived by the senses. The senses are, in turn, perceived by the mind. The mind, in turn, is a movement that unfolds in awareness. Awareness is not perceived by any other structure. It is its own perceiving. All right, so let's break that down a little bit. It sounds like most Eastern philosophies. It sounds mumbo jumbo at first glance, but it's actually what he's stating here is actually the obvious. This is something we experience all the time. We just never really think about it that often. So let's start with that first part. All objects are perceived by the senses. That's obvious, right? Your reality is perceived by your senses. And I know this focuses a lot on the seen and the unseen. It's going to focus on vision a lot, but it really pertains to every sense we have. Vision is just the easiest one because that's the most relevant, unless you're blind and then, hearing. And then if you're deaf, it's vision, right? So, we also have taste and touch and all of that. And this really pertains to all of those. So, all objects are perceived by the senses. Obvious. So if we take again vision, I'm seeing the tablet because my eyes, the sense that sees, is perceiving the visual stimulus of the tablet. Okay? Next part, the senses are in turn perceived by the mind. Now this is starting to go slightly deeper. Now we know this, we just don't think about it. We're going slightly deeper. If you think about it, your eyes aren't actually doing any seeing. It's just, again, let's take the example of the tablet. Light is reflecting off the tablet onto cells in the retina of the eye and just creating electrical impulses. It's the mind itself that is actually analyzing the visual stimulus, what's actually the sensation itself, and turning that into perception. It's sensation versus perception. Okay? The mind, in turn, is a movement that unfolds in awareness. What he means by this is if you go one step deeper, we've got the object. You see the object, it's perceived by your eyes on a surface level. But if you really think about it, your eyes are just getting stimulus. Your mind is actually making sense of that stimulus and perceiving it. This tablet is only a tablet conceptually in my mind. Otherwise, it's just photons reflecting off of stuff, right? The mind, which my thoughts of this is a tablet, this is what it means to me, is a movement that unfolds in awareness. And anybody who's done any meditation and actually watched their thoughts knows that it's clearly a movement of mind stuff, right? Thoughts are something that exist, but they move. They move in front of awareness itself, right? And what that means is by awareness, your overall perception, your perceiving, your experience itself. So it's a great way of saying is your mind has a mind. And I'm not talking about metacognition where your mind is turned in on itself to see what it's doing. I'm talking about there is a level of you that can actually watch and control your mind. You can actually decide on what you want to think about. We all do it, right? So the next part, awareness is not perceived by any other structure. It is its own perceiving. So awareness itself is the top of that perceptual food chain, if you will. So you've got an object, the senses, let's say my eyes perceive it or sense it. My mind makes sense of what the eyes are doing and turns that into a perception. And what my mind is doing is being noticed by awareness in general, the mind of the mind, if you want to put it that way. Okay? Hopefully that makes sense so far. We're not stating anything out of the ordinary. This is all stuff that we know to be true. We just don't think about it a lot, right? All right, next verse. The objects perceived by the senses appear to be constantly changing, while the senses which perceive them appear to be stable and unchanging. And that's just the nature of perception in general. Perceiving itself automatically creates a subject and object. And I know that also sounds like mumbo jumbo, but let's take the tablet again for an example. When I see the tablet, really all there is, I shouldn't say all there is at this point. Let's say what's going on is the act of seeing. The act of seeing itself involves the notion of an object that's being seen and the subject, the seer itself. And that happens with all the senses. When I hear, the act of hearing itself causes something that is heard and makes me the hearer of that which is heard. Okay? Now, every time that happens, it causes this relativity. You know, like when you're sitting on a train and you can convince yourself that the outside is moving, even though you're moving in the train. It happens in a car too. You can be moving in a car and you can actually convince yourself that the stuff that you're driving past is moving and you're not the one moving. It's relativity, right? So who's to say which one of you are actually moving? So this is kind of what he's alluding to. The objects perceived by the senses appear to be constantly changing. And we can attest to that. Stuff you're looking at moves, sounds we hear change. But it seems that our eyes themselves, when we see something moving in front of it, are stationary. The eyes being the senses that for vision, when we perceive them, appear to be stable and unchanging, right? So, I mean, we know that not to be true, which he'll get to next, but just go with him. He's got to state the very basics first, right? So when you see something moving, it appears that that thing is actually moving and you as the seer or your eyes themselves are stationary in order for that to be seen moving. Okay? Next verse. On close inspection, however, the senses are realized to be constantly changing, while the mind, which perceives these changes, appears to be stable and unchanging. Again, it's that same phenomenon. It all depends on where you want to direct what you're thinking about. All right, so on close inspection of when we see things moving around, in fact, it's our senses that are changing. The electrical impulses are firing like crazy from your retinal cells and your neurons and the little hairs in your ear that move when sound waves hit it. And it seems that our senses themselves are what's changing, giving all sorts of informational activity to the mind. And the mind is what is still and unchanging. It's sitting there, not moving, understanding all the chaotic activity that's being thrown at it from the senses. Next verse.